¿Qué pasa todos? Bienvenidos al canal. Y para mis suscriptores, ¿cómo han estado? Hoy escuchamos la canción Despacito del cantante boricua Luis Fonsi con el rapero boricua Daddy Yankee y hablaremos de lo que podemos aprender. This song was recommended to me during my previous live stream by the user Art and Culture Z. Thank you for the suggestion. And I figured I'd check it out, and it looks like there's a lot of good stuff that we can teach from today, and it's a really good song too, so I wanted to go ahead and share it with y'all. Just a heads up before we get started though, this song is pretty raunchy. The lyrics are going to translate to some pretty hot stuff, so just keep that in mind. Viewer discretion is advised, okay? But let's go ahead and get right into it.
Ay. Fonsi. Llevar. Sabes que ya llevo un rato mirándote.
Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about here is where he says, Llevo un rato mirándote. So he's saying, I've been looking at you for a while. So two things I want to talk about here. First off is that word rato. So rato means while, or like a, brief period of time. It's not really a specific amount of time, but we know it's a short amount of time, just a while. And you can also turn that into a diminutive to say un ratito. So un ratito is like saying a little while. So again, it's not really like a specific amount of time, but it's going to be a really short while. And using that diminutive to say un ratito means a little while, just a little while. The other thing I want to talk about here is that verb llevar. Now he's saying llevo un rato mirándote. So he's saying I've been looking at you for a while. I've talked about this before. One of the great things about Spanish is just how efficient the vocabulary is. There's so many words in Spanish that get used all the time that have a bunch of different meanings in various contexts. So you don't have to go on learning new words. You just learn new meanings for the words that you already know. So in the case of llevar, it usually translates as to carry something or to take something to a certain place, or like wearing clothes, but it's also used with expressions of time to talk about how long we've been doing something for. So you could say something like llevo 30 minutos aquí, which is I've been here for 30 minutes. But if you want to follow that up with an action, that verb is always going to be used in the gerund form or the present participle from the progressive aspect. So when he says llevo un rato mirándote, he's using the verb mirar, to look at, but he's using it in the progressive. And whenever you use that llevar with time expressions, you're always going to put those actions into the progressive aspect. Anytime that you're talking about that, just keep that in mind. I've been doing something for a while. So if I say I've been teaching Spanish for 6 months, I would say llevo 6 meses enseñando español. So just keep that in mind, okay?
Tengo que bailar contigo hoy. Vi que tu mirada ya estaba llamándome. Muéstrame el camino que yo voy. Oh, tú eres el imán y yo soy el metal. Me voy acercando y voy armando el plan. Solo con pensarlo se acelera el pulso. Oh yeah, ya me está gustando más de lo normal. Todos mis sentidos van pidiendo más. Esto hay que tomarlo sin ningún apuro. Despacito, quiero respirar tu cuello despacito. Deja que te diga cosas al oído, para que te acuerdes si no estás conmigo. Despacito, quiero desnudarte a besos despacito. Firma las paredes de tu laberinto y hacer de tu cuerpo todo un manuscrito. Sube, 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 sube.
Okay, so just like I was talking about a minute ago about how efficient the vocabulary is in Spanish, this is another great example here. So this is something that Daddy Yankee likes to do in his songs when he's trying to elevate the excitement of the song. He's gonna, get a little bit more animated. He wants the crowd to get more animated. He'll shout out. He'll say sube, 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 sube. So that's from the verb subir. Now the verb subir has a lot of different usages. It oftentimes is talking about like going up something, like climbing a ladder, climbing some stairs, stairs or something like that, or climbing a hill. It can also be used with raising stuff. Not literally raising something. That would be levantar, like when you take something and you pick it up and you raise it into the air. That would be levantar. But subir is going to be used for raising things like the volume of something. So if you're in a car, like an Uber ride, and you want the driver to raise the volume, and you can say súbelo. Súbelo means turn it up. In this case, you're using subir, and then lo is going to replace the volume, el volumen, to say it. And you can also use it to talk about raising the heat in a house, or you can also use it for uploading things. So if you're on the computer and you upload a video, well, you can use the verb subir for that. So subir has a lot of usages. It can also be used reflexively. Most often when it's used reflexively, it's going to be when you're talking about getting onto a mode of transport. So if you say nos subimos al tren, you're saying we got onto the train. So you're going to follow that up with a afterwards when you're talking about getting onto a vehicle or getting into a vehicle. So nos subimos al carro, we got onto the car, we got into the car. And in a lot of cases, subir can be used with an emphatic reflexive or an emphatic se to talk about just the intensity that something is done or how much something is done. I've done a lot of digging into really the difference between subir and subirse as far as talking about when it's correct to use it reflexively versus not reflexively. And there's not really any clear answer on that. If there's any native Spanish speakers in the audience watching this video, I would love your explanation as far as when you would prefer to use subir versus subirse. Because as far as I can tell, it seems like they're pretty much the same. It's more like an emphatic usage. But more specifically, as far as getting onto a mode of transport, you're more often going to use subirse. You're going to use the reflexive version. Although it's not incorrect to say subimos al carro. It's not wrong. It's just not as common. But yeah, again, subir is one of those examples of verbs in Spanish that just have a ton of different usages. So once you learn that first word, you don't have to keep going on learning a bunch of different words for all the different contexts in which subir is used. You just learn the new usages. That's a great thing about Spanish, is just how efficient the language is. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is that word apellido, which means last name. And I'm not really looking to talk so much about the word itself, but more just a little insight into Hispanic culture. So in the United States and in most English-speaking countries, the custom is that the last name is passed down from the father. So whenever a father and a mother get together and have children, the children most often are going to have the father's last name, and then that gets passed down through the generations. However, in Hispanic culture, it's a little bit different. So they've got two last names, and the first last name is the father's last name, or what they call el apellido paterno. So the father's last name is going to be the first one, and then the second last name is the mother's last name, or el apellido materno. So in Hispanic culture, when a father and a mother have a child together, they're each going to take their first last name. So their father's last name, which is the first of their two last names, and it's going to be passed down to the child. So the father's first last name will be passed down as the first last name for the child. And then the mother's first last name is going to be passed down as the second last name for the child. So that's why they've got two last names. It's their father's first last name and their mother's first last name. So that apellido materno, it does get passed down for one generation before it gets overridden by the next generation. So just in case you wondered why Hispanic people have two last names, there's your answer. Okay, let's move on.
Si te pido un beso, ven dámelo. Yo sé que estás pensándolo. Llevo tiempo intentándolo. Mami, estoy dando y dándolo. Sabe que tu corazón conmigo te hace bam bam. Sabe que esa beba está buscando de mi bam bam. Me pruebas de mi boca para ver cómo te sabe. Quiero ver cuánto amor a ti te cabe. Yo no tengo prisa, yo me quiero dar el viaje. Empezamos lento, después salvaje. Pasito a pasito, suavecito. Nos vamos pegando poquito a poquito.
Okay, so the next thing we've got to talk about here is where we've got three sequences of diminutives being used in a row. So we've got pasito a pasito, suave suavecito, and poquito a poquito. The first thing I want to point out is pasito a pasito, which is the diminutive of paso a paso, means step by step. So when you want to talk about something being done in order or a little bit at a time or step by step, you're going to say paso a paso. Paso just means step, so paso a paso means step by step. Also got poquito a poquito. So poquito a poquito is just the diminutive of poco a poco. And it's the very same thing. It's little by little. So when you say poco a poco, voy mejorando mi español, you're saying little by little, I'm improving my Spanish. But that ito, that diminutive, that poquito, poquito a poquito, is really just making it clear that we're talking about small little steps at a time. So a little bit. Un poco is a little, but un poquito is like a little bit, just a tiny little bit. So it's a diminutive. And then we've also got in the middle here, we've got suave, suavecito. So suave means like smooth. It can also mean like gently. But when you use it with the diminutive, suavecito, well, you're not using it to say like a little smooth or a little gently. So there are times in Spanish when you use a diminutive as a way of expressing endearment or affection. And that's what this usage seems to be, at least to me. So he's saying suave, suavecito. So he's saying smooth, and it's like so smooth. So he's adding that affection. He's adding that endearment into it. So that suavecito is just another way of saying suave, but he's adding that little bit of extra emphasis onto it. And there are other times when you use this affectionate diminutive, like when you call somebody your abuelito or abuelita. You know, more than likely, you're not saying your little grandma. You're not saying my little grandpa. You're using an affectionate term. Abuelita means grandma, but it's just being used affectionately with that diminutive, that ito, that ita, just makes it a little bit more affectionate, a little bit more endearing. Okay, let's move on.
Cuando tú me besas con esa destreza, veo que eres malicia con delicadeza. Pasito a pasito, suave suavecito, nos vamos pegando poquito a poquito. Y es que esa belleza es un rompecabezas, pero para montarlo aquí tengo la pieza. Oye, despacito, quiero respirar tu cuello despacito. Deja que te diga cosas al oído, para que te acuerdes si no estás conmigo.
Okay, so just real quick, I want to talk about this phrase, para que. So para que is a subjunctive trigger. It's always going to be followed with the subjunctive, and it's different from saying para. Now, the difference is going to be the change in subject. So when you do something so that you can do something else, you're going to use para because you're the same subject. It's something that you have basically complete control over. When I say, hago videos para ayudar a la gente, I'm saying I make videos to help people. But if I say, hago videos para que la gente aprenda español, well, that's going to be using the subjunctive. I make videos so that people learn Spanish. So just keep that in mind. Whenever you're talking about what you do so that you can do something else, you're going to say para. But when you talk about what you do so that somebody else can do something, you're always going to use para que, and you're always going to use it in the subjunctive. Okay, let's move on.
Despacito, quiero desnudarte a besos despacito. Firma las paredes de tu laberinto y hacer de tu cuerpo todo un manuscrito. Sube, sube. Quiero ver bailar tu pelo, quiero ser tu ritmo. Que le enseñes a mi boca tus lugares favoritos. Favorito, baby. Déjame sobrepasar tus zonas de peligro hasta provocar tus gritos y que olvides tu apellido. Despacito, vamos a hacerlo en una playa en Puerto Rico hasta que las olas griten ay bendito.
Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about before we go ahead and wrap up is where he says, ay bendito. So this word bendito usually means blessed or holy or something like that. So una bendición is a blessing. Bendito usually means blessed or holy. But it can also be used to say things like lucky. When you talk about somebody being lucky, you can say bendito. So you're basically saying they're lucky because they're blessed. But you can also use it as an exclamation. So when you just shout out and you're like, ay bendito. Most of the time, this is going to translate most closely to something like good grief in English. Like, oh my goodness, good grief. So just so you're aware on that, obviously it's not 100% clear which translation works best here. This is all my interpretation of the lyrics. But in this case, because the waves are shouting, ay bendito, because of what they're doing on the beach, it makes the most sense here, at least in my opinion, that they're going to be saying, oh, good grief. Okay, let's go ahead and wrap up.
Para que mi sello se quede contigo. Pasito a pasito, suave suavecito, lo vamos pegando poquito a poquito. Enseñas a mi boca tus lugares favoritos. Favorito, favorito. Pasito a pasito, suave suavecito, lo vamos pegando poquito a poquito. Hasta provocar tus gritos. Sin que olvides tu apellido. Despacito.
Ok amigos, pues eso es todo lo que les tengo para este video. Espero que te haya gustado y que hayas aprendido algo útil hoy. Déjenme un comentario si tienes alguna pregunta acerca de lo que hemos cubierto hoy o si tienes alguna sugerencia para los próximos videos. Muchísimas gracias por ver. Nos vemos pronto. Chao.